Well, guys, if there's one thing that I love, it's a story of an unknown kid who got a chance in Major League Baseball for a very short amount of time and who never really was able to make anything of himself. Some people like to talk about players who were underrated. I like to talk about the guys who were never rated at all, and that's what we're going to look at here today. The man we're going to look at is Dizzy Sutherland. Old Diz was a player you've probably never heard of. Dizzy Sutherland played in one game for the 1949 Washington Senators. He appeared in one inning of work, faced 11 batters total, one full inning, I should say. Gave up 5 runs, 5 hits, and 5 runs all earned, 2 hits, and 6 walks in his one inning of work. And winds up with a minus 0.3 career WAR, which is not very easy to do. We'll go take a look here at that game and give you sort of an idea of what it was like for him. He faced against the Browns at Griffith Stadium. This was on September 20th, 1949, and it was a night game. He gave up a run in the first and then the other 4 in the second. And what happened is exactly what you'd expect, especially from 1949. He walked Bob Dillinger, walked Dick Kokos. Terry Pretty ground out, and the runners moved up. And then Roy Sievers grounded out, and one scored. And Kokos actually was thrown out at third, and Sievers went to first. And then he walked Whitey Platt, and then got Les Moss to pop out. And at the top of the second, Jack Graham walked, John Sullivan walked, Joe Ostrowski doubled to right, scoring 1. Then there was a walk to Bob Dillinger, and then Dick Kokos hit a single to right, and that was just about the end. That was the end, actually, for Sutherland after giving up a double to the pitcher and then being down 4-0. The final run did eventually score with Dick Welteroth up there pitching, and Dick Welteroth himself didn't last very long. Now, the interesting thing about Sutherland is that Dizzy Sutherland actually had a pretty fascinating story, apart from all of that. It wasn't just all about Sutherland, showing up, pitching one game, and doing absolutely nothing. And so we'll trace back through some of these old newspapers really quickly and look at this. We're going to start here in the Charlotte, North Carolina, Charlotte Observer, where there's an article from August 26, 1949, about Sutherland getting his 15th win. Sutherland here, as it's noted in this article, was kind of the big sensation. He was Charlotte's winningest pitcher since 1947 with 15 wins. And that also says a lot, by the way, about how the Washington farm system looked. Sutherland got the victory and later on won his 16th, as it shows here in this August 31st edition of the paper. And afterwards, we go here to the September 2nd edition of the Charlotte News, which talks about how disabled American veterans were going to honor him before his next start. Now, interesting to look at this and to see what happened to him. We'll go to the September 6th, 1949 version of the Charlotte News. And this says a little bit more about his experience. He was honored at home plate before the game. Sutherland was quite interesting because when he was out at the war, he was captured by the Germans right away. He jumped into Sicily. I think it was part of D-Day. And he was captured after about 30 minutes and ended up spending over a year in a German prisoner of war camp and wound up, as they say, 100 pounds underweight. But he got the weight back on him. Now, the interesting thing is that he talks a lot about not just the war with the stories he tells others, but about being a cab driver around Washington, D.C., which is what he was doing before he managed to make the Charlotte Hornets team. He was about 25 years old. So we'll look here next. This is from the Charlotte News in September 13th, 1949, and the big headline was about the Washington Senators buying Sutherland from the Bees. Now, like I said, I think that Washington actually had a direct relationship with Charlotte, so I don't think that Sutherland was actually bought for a great amount of money. But there's a lot of interesting things that it talks about here in this article. There's all this talk about him being a dramatic human interest story because he almost died in the war. He was scouted and recommended by Spencer Abbott. He showed up for spring training. Nobody thought he was going to be impressive, but then he wound up with Charlotte and had an excellent season as a pitcher. And the amazing thing about this is that for a couple years before this happened, he was driving a cab in Washington, D.C. That's the crazy part about this. It's interesting here, as it says, he was returned to Walter Reed Hospital in Washington, D.C. He recovered for 5 months and embarked on a career as a taxi jockey. As he says, I drove for every company in town, whichever one I didn't happen to owe money to, for 3 or 4 years. It made a bum out of me, says Diz, frankly. I was making 15 or 20 bucks a day when I worked, but I didn't work very often, maybe 3 or 4 days a week. Diz isn't hampered by details. He pitched for Merchandise Plumbers, I think that was the name of the team, in the Departmental League or some sandlot league here. Once in a while, he'd pick up $50 a game pitching for a Fredericksburg, Virginia semi-pro club. And then he didn't think he was going to get much attention when he went over to spring training. He was 25 years old, a little bit old for a rookie, but he ended up going to Charlotte and doing well, and the rest was history. Now, this is where it becomes really interesting. We go next to the September 15th, 1949 Washington Evening Star, and this was a little blurb I found. Opportunist grift to hold taxi night. You can see what the Evening Star thought of Clark Griffith. Whatever criticism Clark Griffith, chief of the Nats, may be due, nobody ever has accused him of not being an opportunist. Griff beamed on reading Bert Hawkins' piece yesterday that we just looked at on Diz Sutherland, extremely colorful young pitcher recently signed by the Nats who used to drive a taxicab here. That gives me an idea, Griff snapped. We'll have taxicab night. And taxicab night it'll be next Tuesday with Sutherland making his big league debut against the St. Louis Browns. And so we start learning about taxicab night. There's a little clipping from one of those sort of color commentary articles in the September 18th, 1949 Washington Evening Star that says, in response to queries, taxicab night at Griffith Stadium on Tuesday when the Browns come to town simply means that all cab drivers in the city can attend the game at no increase in the price of admission in order to root for ex-hacky Diz Sutherland, who will be making his big league debut. So yeah, they won't charge you extra if you're a cab driver. Now, the Charlotte News reported on this. This is September 19th, 1949. It's a little bit different here what it says. Clark Griffith has designated tomorrow night taxicab night at Griffith Park. Dix will go against the St. Louis Browns, and every cabbie in Washington who can get the old lady's leave or bring himself free of the wheel will be admitted free. And that's probably what it actually was. I don't think that Clark Griffith was that much of a tightwad. Go to the September 19th, 1949 Washington Evening Star. This was a very short blurb at the end of the Senators game that day. Diz Sutherland, who won 18 games for the Nats Charlotte Farm Club, will pitch tomorrow night. A former cab driver here, Diz has inspired a taxicab night, which means all cab drivers and all fans arriving at the park in taxis will be admitted at the same price as those who came by streetcars, buses, motorcycles, bicycles, or kiddie cars. Now, the word started to spread. We have here from the Freelance Star in Fredericksburg, Virginia, a little blurb about him playing in the big leagues and a note that he played for the Fredericksburg All-Stars briefly in 1948, which probably most people there had no idea of and had never heard of, but they wanted to get their little piece of credit. As we saw, it didn't turn out so well for him on September 20th. September 21st, 1949, the paper here reports, this is the Washington Evening Star, that Sutherland and the other pitchers, Pierce and Dozier, represent the most promising prospects in Washington's farm system, but they aren't ready for promotion. All pitched this year for Charlotte, North Carolina, a Class B club, and in alleged major league surroundings, they resemble Class B pitchers. Sutherland walked 6 and was clipped for 5 runs before being lifted in the second inning. He allowed only 2 hits, but the 5 hurlers who followed him were splattered for 10 more, including a home run, 2 doubles, and a single by rookie Roy Sievers. Now, Sievers had been around for a little while by then. I mean, it's not like he was some guy that nobody'd ever heard of. Anyway, there you have it. Now, as a final sort of tribute here to Dizzy Sutherland, let's take a look and see what his minor league statistics look like. So when we look through this, and we see here on the overview page, he actually didn't play horribly in the minors. Now, I will note here, for some reason, let's see if we click on minor league stats now, it will give me what I'm looking for. He played for Charlotte for a couple of years, and we know he pitched for Richmond very briefly in 1953 at age 31. I don't know what happened in between, and I'm assuming that he was somewhere else in the vast minor league system that existed at the time. But he did go 18-10 for Charlotte in 49 with a 3.22 ERA. 229 innings pitched and pitched quite well against the competition. 1950, he ended up going 17-15. Based on what the Baseball Reference bullpen says, he actually was brought up again in September but didn't pitch for the Senators. So if you're playing 1950, make sure you get out your 49 Sutherland card because you might need to use it. And then in 51 back with Charlotte, he was 14-8 with a 4.40 ERA. Now, I don't know how many hits he gave up. I don't know exactly, what all of his... Oh, no, here we go. We have his hits per 9 innings. He was getting a little bit worse as time went on, probably feeling a little bit comfortable out there. But overall, it's actually not really that bad. I believe that he actually had some talent. He was not 25, but 27, at least as reported here. Born, by the way, in Washington, D.C., which is the reason why he was in that area. I think that old Diz probably actually had enough talent to play at the major league level. Part of the worry that I have is that Clark Griffith brought him up not necessarily to develop him as a pitcher, but rather to have him as sort of like a sideshow. The idea was that, we have this kid with this great story. Let's get what we can out of the story. Who cares what happens to him? Let's put him out there and we'll all have a good laugh. Because, clearly they didn't do very much to train him or to bring him up. There's a problem when your pitcher gives up 6 walks in 3 outs worth of work, and that's exactly what happened here. I tend to I don't know, I might be kind of optimistic, maybe a little bit sentimental when it comes to stuff like this, but I tend to think the best of guys like this. I tend to think that Sutherland, if he really was given a chance, if he had properly been in the minor leagues, if it wasn't for the war, if he'd been pitching in the minors before 49, he probably could have done something and probably could have developed into something, right? I don't think that this is a guy who was just completely awful, had absolutely no control or anything like that. I do think that his one major league outing probably was pretty harrowing, and I don't think that he wanted to go back and remember that because he became a laughingstock right away. But I do think that if you had some good way to sort of project out what he could have done in the major leagues with proper development, then he probably could have been, a major league caliber pitcher, maybe for a couple of years before becoming too old and having to leave. It's not like there were no 27-year-old rookies in 1949. There were tons of guys around who had their careers stunted and delayed because of the war. And so it is. There's the story of Dizzy Sutherland. And keep that in mind, though, next time you run into one of these guys and you're looking at the card and you're saying, how in the world did this guy even get a card to begin with? Sometimes they were really bad, but sometimes they just had some bad luck. And I think in old Diz's case, that's what happened. I bet you anything, if he were really a part of the team, he would have done better than this. Talk to you guys later. Take care. Bye.